Thank you. It's a great privilege to participate as a speaker in Kyung Hee University's lecture series, The Future University, the 21st Century Talks. An honor to be asked to speak on this occasion. I bring warm greetings and good wishes from the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton. I'd like to speak today about the motivation for creating the Institute for Advanced Study in 1930, about its history, about how it works at present, and about the ways that institutes modeled after the Institute in Princeton are being formed around the world and the purposes they are serving. The antecedents to the Institute for Advanced Study are to be found in the 19th century development of the German Humboldtian model for the university. Those who created the Princeton Institute studied in Germany and were taught by others who pioneered the reform of American colleges following the German model. At the beginning of the 20th century, the great American universities had not yet assumed a leading position in the worlds of science and scholarship. Improvements for the perceived deficiencies in American higher education were being sought. For example, in his The Higher Learning in America, written in 1916, the influential American economist Thorstein Veblen, the man who coined the phrase conspicuous consumption, wrote, "A beginning may well be made by a joint enterprise among American scholars and universities for the installation of a freely endowed central establishment where teachers and students of all nationalities, and Americans along with the rest, may pursue their chosen work as guests of the American academic community at large. There should be nothing to hinder the installation of more than one of these houses of refuge and entertainment." More than any other individual, it was Abraham Flexner who conceived and developed the idea that found expression as the Institute for Advanced Study. Flexner had a profound impact on many areas of American education, and especially medical education. Born into a closely knit family of German Jewish immigrants in Louisville, Kentucky, Abraham Flexner was the sixth of 9 children. His father, Moritz Flexner, was a tradesman and hat merchant, and his mother, Esther Abram, was a seamstress. The Flexners valued education highly, but their losses in the financial panic of 1873 ended their hopes of providing a college education for their sons. With the help of his oldest brother Jacob, Abraham attended Johns Hopkins University. In his turn, Abraham helped send his brother Simon to Johns Hopkins. Simon became a noted pathologist and bacteriologist and director of the Rockefeller Institute, which later became Rockefeller University. Abraham spent 2 years at Johns Hopkins and earned a BA in Classics in 1886. Johns Hopkins stressed postgraduate education, then very rare in the United States. Flexner hoped to continue his studies, but the fellowship that he sought eluded him. He returned to Louisville to teach Latin and Greek at the Louisville Male High School. In 1890, he founded his own experimental school, which had no formal curriculum, exams, or grades, but was very successful in preparing students for prestigious colleges. In 1898, Flexner married playwright Anne Crawford, a former pupil in his school and a graduate of Vassar. Anne's financial success on Broadway enabled Flexner to pursue a master's degree in psychology from Harvard and spend a year at the universities of Berlin and Heidelberg. In 1908, Flexner wrote The American College, a critical examination of the deficiencies of American higher education. Then, at the invitation of Henry Smith Pritchett, president of the new Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching, he produced a report on medical education in the United States and Canada. Of the 155 medical schools in the United States and Canada that Flexner visited, his report recommended closing 120. Known widely as the Flexner Report of 1910, it established Flexner's reputation and shaped the future of medical education. Flexner then was asked to produce a report for John D. Rockefeller, Jr. on the suppression and regulation of prostitution in Europe. His work and reputation for thoroughness led to his appointment in 1913 to the General Education Board of the Rockefeller Foundation. Flexner worked for the board until 1928, when he retired from his very influential post as head of the Division of Studies after losing an internal power struggle prompted by changes within the organization. Then, at the age of 62, he accepted an invitation to deliver the 1928 Rhodes Memorial Lecture in Oxford, England, for which he had been recommended by his friend Frank Idelot, then the president of Swarthmore College, who later became Flexner's successor as the director of the Institute. Years earlier, Flexner had helped Idelot win a Rhodes Scholarship to Oxford by coaching him in classical Latin and Greek. Idelot subsequently became American secretary to the Rhodes trustees, and the two men worked together in a variety of ways to improve higher education in the United States. Following his careful analysis of such institutions as Oxford's All Souls College, the Collège de France, and the late 19th century German universities, Flexner recognized the need for an advanced research institution in the United States. In late 1929, when Flexner was expanding some of his lectures into a book, Universities, American, English, German, he was approached by two visitors for advice concerning the philanthropic use of a large sum of money. As Flexner later recalled, I was working quietly one day when the telephone rang and I was asked to see two gentlemen who wished to discuss with me the possible uses to which a considerable sum of money might be placed. At our interview, I informed them that my competency was limited to the education field, and that in this field it seemed to me that the time was ripe for the creation in America of an institute in the field of general scholarship and science resembling the Rockefeller Institute in the field of medicine, developed by my brother Simon, not a graduate school, training men in the known and to some extent in methods of research, but an institute where everyone, faculty and members, took for granted what was known and published, and in their individual ways endeavored to advance the frontiers of knowledge. The two gentlemen were Samuel Liedesdorf and Herbert Maas, representatives of brother and sister philanthropist Louis Bamberger and Caroline Bamberger Fold, the recent widow of Lewis's partner and friend, Felix Fold. With the death of Felix Fold in January 1929, Louis Bamberger had become the sole head of one of the country's leading department stores, the Newark-based L. Bamberger and Company, a business that had begun almost 40 years earlier. Louis Bamberger and Caroline Fold sold the store to R.H. Macy and Company of New York for some $25 million just weeks before the stock market crash in 1929. The Bambergers were deeply committed to community service. They contributed to charities, particularly those serving the Jewish community, to hospitals, youth clubs, museums, the Jewish Theological Seminary, and to Newark's Beth Israel Hospital. Immediately after the sale of L. Bamberger and Company, the Bambergers began searching for a use for their considerable fortune. Feeling that they had benefited greatly from the state of New Jersey and from the people of Newark in particular, the Bambergers thought of establishing a medical school in either Newark or in the Fold Estate in South Orange. They hoped to do something to counter the prejudice against Jews that they perceived as prevalent in the medical profession and in medical education. They therefore proposed to establish a medical school in Newark with preference for Jewish students. To find out whether their project was feasible, they enlisted the help of Liedesdorf, an accountant and their business advisor, who in turn solicited the help of Maas, senior partner in the New York law firm of Maas and Davidson, the firm that had acted for Macy's when it acquired L. Bamberger and Company. From their inquiries, Liedesdorf and Maas were led to Flexner, the most influential figure in the field of medical education. In bringing their request to Flexner, Maas and Liedesdorf had found the right man, but his advice was not what was expected. Flexner asked his visitors, "Have you ever dreamed a dream?" and proceeded to tell them his. The establishment in America of a purely graduate university devoted to learning and researching rather than undergraduate teaching. From the initial meeting in the fall of 1929, it was a matter of months until the formal establishment of the Institute, with Flexner at its helm, in June of 1930. The Institute for Advanced Study was undertaken as a great experiment, born of high ideals and faith in intellectual curiosity. Events moved speedily. A certificate of incorporation for the Institute for Advanced Study, Louis Bamberger and Mrs. Felix Fuld Foundation, was filed on May 20, 1930, with the state of New Jersey. In June, the founders wrote to the first trustees stipulating that the Institute for Advanced Study should be situated in the state of New Jersey and that no gifts should ever be accepted from outside sources that would change the fundamental aims of the Institute, an important precept to which the Institute has rigorously adhered. The Bambergers ultimately agreed with Flexner that the Institute should be located in Princeton, persuaded by the need for proximity to a great library and the wider intellectual community of a great university. Flexner articulated his vision for the Institute as follows. The Institute should be small and plastic, that is, flexible. It should be a haven where scholars and scientists could regard the world and its phenomena as their laboratory, without being carried off in the maelstrom of the immediate. It should be simple, comfortable, quiet without being monastic or remote. It should be afraid of no issue, yet it should be under no pressure from any side, which might tend to force its scholars to be prejudiced, either for or against any particular solution to the problems under study. And it should provide the facilities, the tranquility, and the time requisite to fundamental inquiry into the unknown. Its scholars should enjoy complete intellectual liberty and be absolutely free from administrative responsibilities or concerns. Oswald Veblen, a nephew of Thorstein Veblen's and a professor of mathematics at Princeton University, had also been pushing for the establishment of a high-level research institute. In 1924, Veblen had written to Flexner's older brother Simon, then director of the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, seeking support for an institute for mathematical research. He envisioned a research institute in mathematics that would require no undergraduate teaching duties of its faculty and corresponded with Flexner about the topic. When Veblen saw the announcement about the founding of the institute in the New York Times in June of 1930, he wrote immediately to congratulate Flexner, expressing the wish that the new institute would be located in the borough or township of Princeton so that you could use some of the facilities of the university and we could have the benefit of your presence. Veblen became one of the new institute's first faculty appointments, and the institute found accommodation in Princeton University's then new mathematics building, Fine Hall. The institute and the Princeton University Mathematics Department lived together for 6 years, from 1933 to 1939, before the institute constructed its own building, Fuld Hall, which opened in 1939 and was named in honor of the late Felix Fuld, business partner of Louis Bamberger and husband of Caroline. In the autumn of 1932, Flexner announced publicly the creation of the Institute's first school, the School of Mathematics. The first faculty appointments were Oswald Veblen and Albert Einstein, whom Flexner had met just 8 months earlier during a visit to the California Institute of Technology. On 2 occasions following their meeting in California, Flexner had spoken with Einstein of his plans for the Institute for Advanced Study. Einstein is recording as responding with the words, and here you'll have to forgive my German pronunciation, Ich bin Flamme und Feuer dafür. I am flame and fire for this. With Einstein on the faculty, and with the help of Veblen and Luther Eisenhardt, the dean of the faculty at Princeton University, Flexner began to assemble an outstanding faculty. As word spread throughout the academic community, the Institute quickly became known as one of the world's great research centers. On October 11, 1932, when the New York Times announced the appointment of Einstein to the embryonic institute, it reported that the founder's intention was to establish a scholar's paradise. A year later, when the Institute's academic term had begun, Flexner wrote to Felix Frankfurter, one of the Institute's trustees and later a Supreme Court justice, that what had happened was not exactly what he had planned, but was much better than he had planned. I have frequently used the phrase paradise for scholars without any very distinct notion of just how a paradise would be created, he wrote. What has happened is the following. We have 5 mathematicians of great eminence, each with his own work to do. We have admitted to the Institute about 20 persons who have shown capacity for independent work, persons who have already attained the rank of assistant professor or associate professor in American universities or abroad. They've been turned loose in Fine Hall without any regulation whatsoever. The professors know, of course, what they want to do and are doing it. The students shop around in order to find the man who can be most helpful to them. Frankfurter did not approve of Flexner's rhetorical exuberance. "News from paradise, not my style," he scrawled against Flexner's letter. In his reply, Frankfurter cautioned Flexner against thinking of the Institute as a paradise for scholars, explaining, "The natural history of paradise is none too encouraging as a precedent. Apparently, it was an excellent place for one person, but it was fatal even for 2, or at least for 2 when the snake entered, and the snake seemed to be an early and congenial companion of man. Let's try to aim at something human, for we are dealing with humans and not with angels." The Institute developed against the backdrop of the Great Depression and the rise of fascism. It stood as a beacon of academic excellence and as a haven for scholars fleeing Nazi Germany. In 1933, Flexner recruited John von Neumann, a young but already renowned mathematician who had fled Europe and was then a visiting professor at Princeton University. Von Neumann's work would profoundly influence fields ranging from game theory to climatology to computer science. After Adolf Hitler became chancellor in January 1933, Hermann Weyl, the mathematician who had succeeded David Hilbert to the world's most prestigious chair in mathematics at the University of Göttingen, decided to cross the Atlantic to join the Institute. The anti-Semitic policies of the Nazi regime had made the Institute attractive to Einstein, Weyl, and von Neumann, and they forced a generation of promising Jewish mathematicians to seek refuge as well. The Institute became a lifeline in the migration of European scholars to the United States. Veblen, Einstein, and Weyl played a prominent role in helping European scholars obtain memberships at the Institute or financial aid from the Rockefeller Foundation. Kurt Gödel, one of history's major logicians, and Carl Ludwig Siegel, who became one of the 20th century's great number theorists, were given permanent member appointments and eventually were invited to join the faculty. Although founded as the School of Mathematics, the Institute's first school included physicists as well as mathematicians. Einstein was a physicist. Weyl and von Neumann were mathematicians who had made major contributions to physics. At this time, there was no separation between mathematics and theoretical physics, and there would be no separate School of Natural Sciences until 1966. By the start of the academic year 1933-34, the Institute had faculty of 5 leading mathematicians and theoretical physicists, James Alexander, Einstein, von Neumann, Veblen, and Weyl, as well as over 20 visitors. In 1934 and 1935, respectively, this group was joined by Paul Dirac and Wolfgang Pauli. With the opening of the Institute for Advanced Study, Princeton replaced Göttingen as the world center for mathematics, and by providing exceptional conditions and opportunities to faculty and visiting scholars, the Institute set an example for universities throughout the United States and the world. The Institute was founded on 2 principles. First, those individuals who work at the Institute should be selected on the basis of their abilities alone and with no regard to race, creed, or gender. Second, the Institute should enable curiosity-driven pursuit of knowledge with no view to its immediate utility or the expectation of meeting predetermined goals. Flexner argued not only for the cultural value of curiosity-driven research, but also for its utilitarian value. In his provocatively titled essay, The Usefulness of Useless Knowledge, published in Harper's Magazine in October 1939, Flexner argued the case for spiritual and intellectual freedom. Citing numerous instances from the history of science, he presented the benefits of self-directed, curiosity-driven, theoretic, or seemingly useless research. observing that most of the great discoveries beneficial to humanity were made by men and women driven not by the desire to be useful, but merely the desire to satisfy their curiosity. He argued that institutions of learning should be devoted to the cultivation of curiosity, and the less they are deflected by considerations of immediacy of application, the more likely they are to contribute not only to human welfare, but to the equally important satisfaction of intellectual interest, which may indeed be said to have become the ruling passion of intellectual life in modern times. In presenting his argument, Flexner cited, among other examples, the abstract mathematics of non-Euclidean geometry, without which the theory of relativity would have been impossible. He concluded that curiosity, which may or may not eventuate in something useful, is probably the outstanding characteristic of modern thinking. It is not new. It goes back to Galileo, Bacon, and Sir Isaac Newton, and it must be absolutely unhampered. The prime example Flexner gave was the work of James Clerk Maxwell on the theory of electromagnetism. Maxwell, seeking to understand the relationship between electricity and magnetism in a more comprehensive, unified, and mathematically consistent way, set out his famous 4 equations in 1861. From the solutions to the equations, he concluded that visible light was an electromagnetic wave, and that electromagnetic waves of long wavelength, radio waves, might be observed. These were in fact observed in 1887 by Heinrich Hertz, working in the Berlin laboratory of Hermann von Helmholtz. It took another 14 years, 40 in all, before Guglielmo Marconi gave a definitive demonstration of the utility of these developments by sending radio waves across the Atlantic. However, Flexner argued that the key step in this was Maxwell's research, driven not by considerations of practical value, but rather by a desire to understand the basic laws of nature. The guiding principle of the Institute are embodied by the official seal. Created by the French artist M. Pierre Turin in 1932, it predates our first building on the campus. Flexner oversaw its elements and design. The notes that I would like struck, Flexner directed, are truth and beauty. Turin's design included a third element of a fruit-bearing tree to symbolize knowledge. Flexner wrote in July 1931, "Every college seal that I have seen is a fake coat of arms. That is all very well in Oxford and Cambridge and Paris, but we ought to plant our feet firmly upon the here and now and utilize our freedom to devise new forms of beauty which shall be expressive of our efforts." The original die from which medals and book plates were made is now in the Paris Mint. When the appointment of Albert Einstein was announced in October 1932, the Washington Post commented, "Professor Albert Einstein's decision to carry on his future work in America is of less importance than the inauguration of the educational venture with which he will be associated." The name of this great scientist lends dignity to the Institute for Advanced Study, to be launched next year by Dr. Abraham Flexner. But if this new super university succeeds, its effect upon American life may be far more important than the theory of relativity and all of its corollaries. The Institute exists today largely due to Flexner's vision and enthusiasm. His dream has proved exceptionally successful. He was prescient in seeing the need for an institution that crosses disciplinary boundaries and is not constrained by an undergraduate curriculum, that provides scholars and scientists of proven achievement the opportunity to pursue research driven by their own intellectual curiosity, that selects only on the basis of ability, attracting the ablest researchers from all around the world, whose structure is very flexible so that it can change with time, that remains relatively small so that it retains a sense of community, a true academic village, a community of scholars. Faculty and members are given complete freedom to pursue their curiosity and interact with one another without any departmental or disciplinary barriers. A period spent as a member is often a life-changing experience. Young postdoctoral fellows meet their contemporaries who, with them, will be leading figures in their fields in the future. More senior members, freed from administration and teaching, have the time and freedom to initiate new lines of research. A period spent at the Institute impacts not just the member, but often his or her colleagues as well. Here I will give a few examples. While at the Institute, renowned differential geometer Xing-Shen Chern developed his work on the Gauss-Bonnet formula. In a letter to Institute Director Frank Eidelot, Chern wrote, "The years 1943 to 1945 will undoubtedly be decisive in my career, and I have profited not only in the mathematical side. I am inclined to think that among people who have stayed at the Institute, I was one who had profited the most, but the other people may think the same way." In addition to helping to establish MSRI, the Mathematics and Science Research Institute, and serving as its first director, Chern founded 2 mathematics institutes in China, at the Academia Sinica in Nanking and at his alma mater, Nankai University in Tianjin. Raoul Bott was invited to the Institute by Weil, who thought Bott's solution of an important problem relating to electrical networks was interesting mathematically and suggested that Bott might write a book on network theory. But when Bott arrived at the Institute in 1949, he became interested in other exciting mathematical work going on around him. He went to Professor Marston Morse, who was at that time in charge of the postdoctoral fellows, and very timidly asked, "Do I really have to write this book?" Without hesitating for a moment, Morse replied, "Of course not. Here you are free to do what really interests you." During his second year, Bott, who went on to become a professor at Harvard and one of the most influential mathematicians of the last 60 years, started to do more constructive work. He later observed, "There was no question that my whole career would have been completely different if I had not had the remarkable opportunity of participating in a place that is so single-mindedly determined to let your own imagination flourish." When Bott returned to the Institute in the mid-1950s, he met, worked with, and became lifelong friends with Fritz Herzebruck from Germany, Michael Atiyah from Great Britain, and Isidor Singer from the United States. Herzebruck, Atiyah, and Singer founded institutes of their own. Herzebruck founded the Max Planck Institute in Bonn in 1980, which, with his earlier regular workshops, had a major influence on the development of mathematics in Germany from the late 1950s onwards. Atiyah, the Newton Institute in Cambridge in 1992, and Singer, with former members Chern and Calvin Moore, MSRI in Berkeley in 1982. Bott, Herzebruck, Atiyah, and Singer continued to collaborate as increasingly major figures on the mathematical scene. They brought their students together, and some of them collaborated with one another. And the students also came in their turn to the Institute and to other institutes that had been founded, and so on. A whole international community had been born. When Quentin Skinner, now Barbara Beaumont Professor of the Humanities at Queen Mary, University of London, first came to the Institute as a member, in the School of Social Science, in his mid-30s, he was at a stage of his career in Cambridge where, he has said, the amount of teaching he was doing was beginning to overwhelm him. He had been working for several years on what was to become the foundations of modern political thought, listed in 2000 by the Times Literary Supplement as one of the 100 most influential books of the last 50 years. But he saw little chance of finishing it. He views the period he spent at the Institute as altering his life. One thing that struck me in the first year I was there, Skinner has said, and which has always remained with me, was an image of professionalism. It permanently captured me. There was a sense that being a scholar was a 24 hours a day business, that issues were far larger than we were. The Institute remains small, independent, and unaffiliated with any university, including Princeton University, with which it is often erroneously associated. Its work is organized into 4 schools: mathematics, natural sciences, history, and social sciences. It has a permanent faculty of no more than 28 professors who have changed thought in their own subject and often influenced other disciplines. Their prime duty is to advance knowledge in their own field, and they are responsible for choosing members and providing advice and mentoring. They are collectively responsible for the academic policy of their school and at present there are 26 faculty and 17 emeriti. They are recruited internationally. There has been slow growth in the number of IAS professors since our founding, from 5 in 1933 to just over 25 today. Around 170 members from over 30 different countries come to the Institute each year. They range from young postdoctoral fellows to emeritus professors. Most stay 1 year, but postdocs in the sciences stay from 2 to 5 years. When at the Institute, members are free to follow their curiosity. Young scholars and applicants from non-traditional backgrounds who have outstanding promise are considered, as are senior scholars whose reputations are already well established. The major consideration in the appointment process is the expectation that each member's period of residency at the Institute will result in work of significance and originality. Many members pursue research related to the special interests of one or more of the faculty. In other instances, the research of members is in areas not currently represented by a member of the faculty. From its very beginning, because of its high aspirations and because of the unstable political context of the world when it was founded in 1930, the Institute was placed on an international stage rather than a national one, and 60% of its faculty and visiting members continue to come from outside the United States. The Institute has never had laboratories, and our theoretical scientists have often worked closely with experimental colleagues elsewhere. For example, in biology, where our faculty run laboratories in other institutions, and in theoretical physics, where our faculty work closely with experimentalists to understand data from high-energy particle accelerators, such as the Large Hadron Collider at CERN in Geneva. The recent discovery of the Higgs particle took more than 50 years of theoretical and experimental work and the tremendous effort of more than 10,000 scientists and engineers working on the Large Hadron Collider. Peter Higgs, who predicted the existence of the particle, gave one of his first seminars on the topic at the Institute for Advanced Study in 1966. The discovery demonstrates the enormous importance of fundamental deep ideas, the length of time these ideas can take to come to fruition, and the enormous impact they have on the world. These long and complex chains have developed in numerous and astounding ways through research originating at the Institute, from the development of programmable computers to uncovering the deep symmetries of nature to advances in societal understanding and historical practice. This is due in large part to the precious freedom that faculty and members at the Institute experience, an independence enabled by the generosity of our founders and subsequent benefactors, for which we are immensely grateful. What began with 23 members invited to the School of Mathematics has grown to include more than 6,000 scientists and scholars who collectively have changed the world and our understanding of it. Outside the academic community, the Institute is probably best known as the home of Einstein, but he was among the first in a long line of distinguished scientists and scholars, including Kurt Gödel, Hetty Goldman, George Kennan, Robert Oppenheimer, Erwin Panofsky, Homer Thomson, John von Neumann, Hermann Weyl, Clifford Geertz, who have produced a body of knowledge of the physical world and of humanity that has prompted technological and cultural advances in science and society. The Institute's more than 6,000 former members hold positions of intellectual and scientific leadership throughout the academic world. Some 33 Nobel laureates and 38 out of 52 Fields medalists, as well as many winners of the Wolf and MacArthur Prizes, have been affiliated with the Institute. 3 Institute for Advanced Study faculty have won the Nobel Prize while living in Einstein's home at 112 Mercer Street. This is probably the only house in the whole world that has had 3 unrelated Nobel Prize winners living in it. Einstein in 1921, the Nobel Prize in Physics, Frank Wilczek, the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2004, and Eric Maskin, the Nobel Prize winner in Economics in 2007. The work of the Institute's faculty and members has had permanent impact in both intellectual and practical terms. One of the first stored program computers was designed and built on the Institute's campus by von Neumann, and its structure, called von Neumann architecture, has influenced the development of today's computers and formed the mathematical basis for computer software. The foundations of game theory, a powerful tool in economics, were formed in the School of Mathematics at the Institute, and much of the basis of modern theoretical meteorology was laid by research there. Particle physics, including string theory and astrophysics, has been greatly advanced by research in the School of Natural Sciences. Work in the School of Social Science has had wide-reaching impact on the field of global development. Books by faculty in the School of Historical Studies have become key texts in a range of historical disciplines, and in particular have made essential contributions to the establishment of art history as a discipline in the United States. Current research at the Institute includes using genetic data to potentially revolutionize our understanding of migration history, recreating the entire mathematical universe using a formal logic system developed by computer scientists to enable mathematicians to use computers to build and verify proofs, trying to understand how mind emerges from brain, just as we understand how tornadoes emerge from molecules, and developing critical anthropology of morals that extends from immigration policies and minorities issues to the administration of asylum and the deployment of humanitarianism. The Institute was first endowed by a gift of $5 million from the Bambergers, from whom a sequence of subsequent gifts followed, amounting to a total of over $200 million US in today's value. The Bambergers and other benefactors over the decades have provided the independence that is crucial to securing the freedom for scholars and scientists to pursue their curiosity rather than fulfill predetermined objectives. The Institute's endowment, currently valued at $650 million US, provides about 65% of the Institute's core expenses. The Institute does not receive income from tuition or fees. Resources for operations come from endowment, grants from private foundations and government agencies, and gifts from corporations and individuals. Operating income for fiscal 2013 will be $54 million, which includes $35 million from the endowment, $9 million from fundraising, $7 million from the government, and $3 million from earned income. Operating expenses for fiscal 2013 are $31 million for salaries and stipends, $20.5 million in other costs, and $2.5 million in debt service. Capital income for fiscal 13 is $10.5 million, which includes $7.5 million from endowment and $3 million in borrowing. Capital expenses for FY13 are $8 million for capital expenditures and $2.5 million in debt service. Among our most generous benefactors are our trustees. In 2011, the Institute launched a 4-year, $200 million campaign with a $100 million challenge grant from the Simons Foundation, established by board chairman James Simons and his wife Marilyn, and the Charles and Lisa Simoni Fund for the Arts and Sciences. All gifts and pledges made to support the Institute's core activities during the campaign, which runs from January of 2011 to June of 2015, help the Institute meet its $200 million goal. Two groups also provide essential support to the Institute: the Association of Members of the Institute for Advanced Study, AMIAS, the organization of schools, scholars, and researchers who are current or former members or visitors to the Institute, and the Friends of the Institute for Advanced Study, a dedicated group of some 500 individuals from the local community of Princeton and the surrounding areas. Outright contributions from AMIAS and Friends of the Institute total about $1 million each year. These contributions, combined with contributions from AMIAS and the Friends endowments, funds a total of 8 memberships, 4 Friends memberships, 1 in each school, and 4 AMIAS memberships, also 1 in each school. Additionally, Friends funds help support a number of academic and artistic endeavors, including the Institute's Artist in Residence concert series, a theoretical physics summer school for graduate students and postdoctoral scientists, various lecture series, and the Institute's libraries. Each year, members, most accompanied by their families, join the permanent professors and emeritus professors to form the resident institute community. Nearly all of them live in apartments, originally designed by Marcel Breuer in 1957, at the edge of the Institute's campus, set on 800 acres of farmland and woods, whose paths were cleared by some of its first faculty and members. In the development of its campus, members of the Institute's Buildings and Grounds Committee made it a priority to provide local housing for the members and a large proportion of the faculty. This has allowed for the cultivation of ideas and the sense of community that fosters serendipitous interactions and incidental discussions in a true academic village. The Institute gradually acquired most of its land between 1936 and 1945, strengthening the Institute's endowment and providing a tranquil environment for scholars engaged in theoretical research and intellectual inquiry. It took more than 5 years from the Institute's founding for a decision to be made to locate the Institute on Olden Farm, near a Quaker meeting house on a settlement known as Stony Brook in Princeton. Flexner was initially opposed to the purchase of the property, saying, "I am quite clear at this moment we have neither the time nor the money to bother about the Olden Manor and the Olden Farm. It is my conviction that we will never have any academic buildings on the farm, and I have such grave doubts as to the use of the manor for social purposes." Once again, Veblen played a leading role in shaping the Institute's future. In 1934, Veblen wrote to Flexner stressing the importance of purchasing more land than might be deemed necessary and saying, "There is no educational institution in the United States which has not in the beginning made the mistake of acquiring too little rather than too much land." By 1936, 256 acres had been purchased for a total of $290,000, including the 200-acre Olden Farm with Olden Manor, the former home of William Olden and the residence of the Institute's director since 1940, as well as a large working barn. Veblen continued to explore local land for sale, and over the next few years, he bargained with local landowners to help the Institute acquire a total of 610 acres, including the Institute Woods. In addition to helping secure most of the Institute's land, Veblen organized what was called the Wood Chopping Group, according to the late Dean Montgomery, professor in the School of Mathematics. They used to go out and clear some of the paths that nobody had cleared at that time. Veblen was joined by many notable figures, including Paul Dirac, the distinguished physicist who was a frequent member in the School of Natural Sciences between 1934 and 1963. According to George Dyson, author of Turing's Cathedral, no one will ever know how many problems in mathematics, physics, history, astronomy, economics, political science, social science, computing, and biology have been brought one step closer to a solution by a shared conversation or a solitary walk in the Institute woods. Tea time, served each weekday at 3 p.m. in the common room at Fold Hall, is a tradition that dates back to the Institute's beginnings. Veblen's wife Elizabeth introduced afternoon tea to the Institute community when the Institute was housed in Fine Hall on the campus of Princeton University. Carl Kaysen, the Institute's fourth director, commissioned architect Robert Geddes to build the dining hall and West Building in 1969. The new dining hall, now known as Simon's Hall, was a much-needed replacement for the lunchroom on the fourth floor of Fold Hall, where the need to eat quickly so as to free one's seat for a colleague gave little opportunity for leisurely interaction. Here is Paul Dirac in the center and Abraham Pius center right, with other members in the Fold Hall dining room. The first meal was served in the new dining hall on October 13, 1970 at noon. In the summary report that was published at the end of Carl Kaysen's tenure in 1976, he describes the dining hall as having contributed a great deal towards enlarging and humanizing the non-academic life of the Institute. New activities to counter the tendency towards isolation felt by some members arise almost spontaneously in this setting. Dinners, on the model of the Society of Fellows at Harvard, give Institute professors a chance to invite members to share good food and conversation with those in other schools, as well as guests from outside the Institute. All of these occasions are important in stimulating contact amongst members of the several schools. It is an end valuable in itself and one that sometimes bears intellectual fruit. Today, any day, at lunch or tea, you will hear leading scientists and scholars from around the world discussing topics as diverse as the response to terrorism, understanding the organization of biological systems, ancient DNA analysis, the very latest developments in string theory, the mathematical basis of computer security, morals and morality in a contemporary society, and the implications of the discovery of a Higgs-like boson. Throughout the year, the Institute hosts a broad array of concerts, lectures, and programs. The Artist in Residence program at the Institute was established in 1994 to provide an environment that would enrich the synergistic and essential relationship between thought and performance, ideas, and artistry within the Institute. The first unofficial artist in residence at the Institute was the poet T.S. Eliot, who visited as a member in the School of Historical Studies in October 1948, a month prior to his being awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature. Official artists in residence have included pianist Robert Taub and composers John Magnuson, Paul Moravec, Derek Bermel, and most recently Sebastian Courier, who will join the Institute in July. The Institute offers numerous and varied activities for members, visitors, and their families, including films, play readings, clay modeling, yoga, tennis lessons, jazz evenings, trips to museums and other cultural sites, and activities for children in the Institute community. In addition to the main work taking place in the Institute's 4 schools, the Institute supports several special programs. Since 1994, the IAS Park City Mathematics Institute has integrated mathematics, educators, researchers, and students through innovative programs. The program for Women in Mathematics, sponsored jointly with Princeton University, provides substantive mathematics content as well as practical encouragement for women to pursue careers in the fields of mathematics. The School of Natural Sciences sponsors Prospects in Theoretical Physics, a 2-week residential summer program held at the Institute for exceptionally promising graduate students and postdoctoral scholars. And in 1999, the Institute created the Science Initiative Group, an international team of scientific leaders and supporters dedicated to fostering science in developing countries. I'd like to close my talk with some thoughts about what the Institute for Advanced Study is and what it isn't. The Institute is not a quiet place where theories are set in stone and above question. In fact, it is just the opposite. Research at the Institute involves questioning a world of diverse facts, structures, ideas, and cultures. Advancing knowledge is a very active and tumultuous enterprise. There is an overriding willingness to admit uncertainty and to try to understand it. This extends across the sciences and humanities, from physics to medieval studies. You might think of the Institute as producing clues for greater understanding of the workings of nature and humanity. Time and again, fundamental research produced at the Institute has grown through networks of colleagues to influence fields of study, impacting the world in many different ways. While the Institute has remained small, its influence has been wide through the work of the faculty and members, the impact of time at the Institute has on careers of members and their home institutions, and the many institutions around the world, ever growing in number, that have been modeled on or inspired by the Institute. The creation of new institutes for advanced study is not only a recent trend, though it appears to be one that has been accelerating. More than 50 years ago, J. Robert Oppenheimer, then director of the Institute, wrote to the French Ministry of Education, arguing that the French government should support what became the Institut des Études Scientifiques, or IHES, which was soon after established just outside of Paris. With the increasing magnitude, complexity, and busyness of scientific progress in all fields, and with the growth of higher education systems which correspond to a new development in the world's history, university professorships no longer necessarily offer the opportunity for seclusion and for the most difficult and intensive intellectual effort, which was once their special hallmark. For this reason, places of retreat, which are in effect places for advance, have been brought into being. These serve multiple functions, but basic to them all is an opportunity for much more intensive concentration on study and research than is elsewhere possible. Fortunately, Oppenheimer was correct about establishing institutes. I would like to leave you on a final note drawn from the Institute's history, its success, and its principles. If you know precisely what you are going to do before you do it, and how and when you will get results, it is unlikely that you are doing truly fundamental research. The really important ideas, the ones that change the way we think and the way that we live our lives, are likely to be found by researchers following their curiosity into the unknown rather than by objective-driven research. It is our privilege and obligation to provide them with this opportunity. So let me conclude and end by thanking you for your attention and saying that if there are any questions that you'd like to ask now, I would be happy to take questions.
It seems that you have come from a very, very different world, or even a different planet. Here in Korean universities, including this one, professors very harshly push it to make publications and to teach a lot of students. But in your institute, it seems that professors are living in a kind of paradise. Okay, so you talk a lot about success stories of very well-known members of your institute, but I'm curious that whether you have some failed stories, the professors who didn't produce at all or who didn't produce any, globally known knowledges or books, You may have some instances, don't you?
Failure stories. What an interesting question.
Do you have any very top evaluation system for your professors? No?
I'm sorry?
Kind of evaluation of the performance of your professors.
Well, that's a very good question. Do we have any kind of evaluation system? We have two groups of scientists and scholars at the Institute. As I said, there are permanent faculty and there are visiting members. In both cases, when people come to the Institute, they're told you can work on whatever you want to work on while you're there. We ask the visiting members before they come to make a proposal about what they'll work on. But when they arrive, we tell them, you don't have to do that. We hope you'll do something even better and even more important while you're here. And at the end of the year, we ask them to write a report about what they've done, but we don't do any sort of external evaluation of their work. The permanent faculty, when they come, from that point on, we're very careful about choosing the permanent faculty because it's essentially a lifetime appointment. When permanent faculty come to the Institute, typically they stay there for the rest of their careers and beyond. As I said, we currently have 17 emeritus faculty at the Institute. So our faculty members retire at the age of 70, but they stay at the Institute and continue to work because we continue to give them an office and clerical help and travel funds and research funds as long as they care to be active. But at no point do we evaluate their work and make a decision about when they can stay. That decision is made when they're hired and come to the Institute, and then they remain permanent faculty. I'm still fascinated by this question, though, about failure stories. And I'm sure there have been people who have come to the Institute who ultimately have not been as successful in their careers because we've had 6,000 members come to the Institute, and obviously not every single one of those will have been successful. But in the process of choosing the visiting scholars and scientists, just to cite one small area, In the field of theoretical physics, most of the members who come are postdoctoral members. So they're typically coming to the Institute immediately after their doctoral studies. Last year, we had spaces for 10 new postdocs in theoretical physics, and we had 400 applicants for those 10 spots. So we choose very, very carefully, and that reduces the chance greatly that someone is going to be a failure eventually, and increases the chances that they'll be very, very successful.
So, Mr. Gehret, you have experience with this, the cultural organizations such as symphony orchestra. Actually, more than 30 years of your career is devoted to that side of experience. It is very interesting for us, to us. And could you please share us with your, how your cultural, organizations, as a manager of cultural organizations, and this career can go hand in hand with this very pure academic research institute that you take in charge right now?
The factor that ties together my experience with cultural institutions, with symphony orchestras, and my experience with the Institute for Advanced Study is the fact that I've been doing fundamentally the same job at both institutions, which is that I've been focused on fundraising and public affairs, public relations, marketing. So my responsibilities have been similar in both institutions. There's obviously a great difference between what that fundraising supports in the orchestra world and what it supports at a place like the Institute for Advanced Study. And there's a fundamental difference in our audiences too. For the symphony orchestra, I was working with people who were in general subscribers or ticket buyers, people who went to concerts, and the audience was almost entirely local. Each city in the United States has its own symphony orchestra, so the donors to the orchestra typically come from a local region. In that respect, the Institute for Advanced Study is totally different because we have a small group of local supporters, but most of the supporters of the Institute live elsewhere. And particularly in New York City. We have a lot of supporters from New York City. So I've had to learn how to develop relationships with donors who aren't right there in Princeton, but who are some distance away. And what we have found very clearly is that we can be most successful with donors when we actually get them to come to the Institute for Advanced Study and see what it is that we do there, to visit the Institute, to meet with the director and with me, and to meet with faculty and talk with them about the work that goes on at the Institute. So there are many fundamental similarities, even though the product is different. Music versus education, the similarities are there in the processes at both institutions, both kinds of institutions.
간단하게 두 가지 질문을 드리겠습니다. 하나는 펀드레이징을 할 때, 모금을 할 때 도너들이 어드밴스 스터디즈에 돈을 기부하겠다고 결정하게 되는 이유 중에 어떤 이유가 가장 중요한 이유라고 판단을 하시는지, 뭐 reputation도 있을 수 있고, history도 있을 수 있고, 뭐 great academic potential도 있을 수 있고 여러 가지 있을 수 있는데 다른 이유 중에서 특히 Institute for Advanced Study에 돈을 기부를 하시는 분들은 무엇을 가장 큰 이유로 삼는지 한번 알고 싶습니다. 그리고 두 번째는 스쿨이 4개가 있는데 처음에는 Mathematics School에서 시작했지만은 그 나머지 뒤에 Natural Science, Social Science, History 하면서 그 카테고리가 굉장히 브로드하게 잡혀 있는 것 같습니다. 특히 그 Social Science하고 History를 비교할 때 History 밑에는 어떻게 보면은 소셜 사이언스에 들어갈 수도 있는 것들이 히스토리에 들어가 있고 소셜 사이언스 스쿨에는 3개, 4개 정도로 한정되어 있는 것 같아요. 그 구분이 어떻게 되어 있고 대체적으로 어떤 이유에서 그런 식으로 4개의 스쿨로 자리를 잡게 됐는지 궁금합니다.
Let me answer the first question about donors and key factors in supporting the Institute. We look for a particular kind of individual when we're looking for donors to the Institute. And here, I think I refer especially to what we would consider major donors. That is, donors who might give us $1 million or more. We cultivate those people very carefully, and it's really not hard, not difficult in the United States to identify wealthy people. There are in the magazines, in Forbes or in Fortune or in other magazines, lists of billionaires. So we know who those people are. But the challenge for us is, first of all, finding those donors who will understand and appreciate what it is that the Institute does. And so the people who are likely to be the very best donors for us are people who are themselves PhDs, who would have liked to be academics, who would have preferred to be academics probably, but who instead chose to go out into the world and make a lot of money. And those people make great prospects for the Institute because they love to come to the Institute and interact with the faculty. It makes them kind of dream about what their lives might have been like if they'd been able to be academics instead of having to work in the world of business. So those are the kinds of people who are the best donors for us. And beyond just having an appreciation for the Institute and what it does, the other key factor really here is personal relationships. We try very hard to build a personal relationship with each donor. And sometimes that relationship is with the director, sometimes it's with one of our trustees, sometimes it's with me or another staff member, but always we try to make that personal link with the donor so that they always feel comfortable coming to the Institute. We try to keep them well informed about what the Institute does. We want them to feel that they're always being treated very specially. And when we fail to make that kind of a personal relationship with the donor, then we often lose that relationship. So that establishing that relationship is really important. Let me just say a word then about your second question about the establishment of the schools. As I said in my talk, the very first school that was established was a school of mathematics, which really had both physicists and mathematicians. There was also a school of politics and economics that was established about the end of the Second World War, so right before the Second World War. And during the Second World War, many of the people in that school went to work in government agencies, so that school disbanded. And then around the 1950s and 1960s, that's when the School of Historical Studies was established, and also the School of Natural Sciences was spun off from the School of Mathematics. So in natural sciences, we had particle physics and astrophysics, and later added biology. So there was a School of Mathematics, School of Natural Sciences, School of Historical Studies. Then in 1970, Carl Kazin, who was then the director, decided that there should be a School of Social Science. And it was extremely controversial at the Institute. There was almost a war on the faculty. And mostly the faculty in the School of Mathematics and the faculty in the School of Historical Studies, who were very concerned that in order to establish a new School of Social Science, it would mean taking funding away from those schools and applying it to the School of Social Science. So the way Carl Kazin finally was successful in establishing the School of Social Science was that he went out and raised money, especially for the School of Social Science. He raised endowment funds so that he could say to the other schools, when we establish this school, it will be funded from this endowment and it will take no funding away from your schools. And that's how he finally got that accomplished. And the irony is that now the School of Social Science is the best endowed school of the 4 schools at the Institute. About 95% of the funding for the School of Social Science comes from restricted endowment for that school.
지금 연설해 주신 분은 아마 그 기금이나 아니면 홍보 전략 그런 그 전문가이신데요. 그 부소장이신데 그 연구소에는 부소장 직함 가지신 분들이 여러 분들이 나눠 있는지 지금요 연구소 소장이 몇 분 계시는지 그리고 지금의 그 강연해 주신 분도 종신 교수분처럼 소장님도 부소장님도 우리는 정년이라 그러는데요. 그쪽 같은 종신 교수처럼 언제까지 근무할 수 있는지 70세다 그러셨는데 그 지금 교수분들은 70세인데 지금 어떠신지 그다음에 아까 그렇게 소장 부소장 분들이 나눠 있다 그런지 그다음에 그 연구소의 연구원들이 부소장이나 소장직을 겸하고 있는지 이런 부분 좀 듣고 싶거든요.
There are 3 groups at the institution. There are permanent faculty. We now have 27 permanent faculty. And they are in one group. The second group are the visiting fellows, whom we call members, of whom there are 27 permanent faculty. At any given time, there are about 170 members who are visiting the Institute from periods of from 1 year to 5 years. And then there are staff, and the staff are relatively permanent. There's a director. The director is my boss. The director is always an academic. In this case, the director is Robert Dijkgraaf, who's a theoretical physicist, string theory. He was the president of the Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences until 1 year ago when he became director. So he's been director for 1 year. His appointment is for 5 years, and he can be reappointed for another 5 years. So he can serve up to 10 years. There are 2 associate directors. I am one of 2 associate directors. So I have responsibility for development and public affairs. The other associate director has responsibility for the business part of the Institute. So he has responsibility for budgets, investments, buildings and grounds, and human resources. Our appointment is at the pleasure of the director. So my term will be as long as the director wants to have me there. And when the director wants a new associate director, my term will end. The remainder of the staff, they're appointed at will. And so they're continuing at the Institute, depends on their performance. So they have no term limits, but also they, in that sense, don't have permanent appointments. They're considered just standard employees of the Institute. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Going back to Director Kwon Gi-bung's question about the what might be the most intimate or direct reason why people actually donating money to the particular organization, and you mentioned about 2 reasons why. 1, value or dream sharing, and second, make it personalized. Mm-hmm. And could you please give us some detailed example of the first part? I mean, how can we share our dream or value with the candidate donors?
Well, we tend to deal with donors one person at a time. So we do that probably differently with each of our major donors. As I said, probably the best way to share that vision about the Institute with the donor is to get them to come to the Institute and visit and meet with the director and meet with faculty. But if we can't get them to do that, then we need to construct other ways to do that. So, for instance, we have a group that we call the Centennial Council. And that is a group both for stewardship for current donors and also for working with prospective donors. And we do very special events, generally in New York, for that group, where we choose an interesting location and bring together an interesting group of speakers, and use that as a way both to thank people who have been very generous donors to us, and also as a way to interest new donors in the Institute. We spend a lot of time also thinking about communications. And so I would encourage any of you who want to take a look at our website. There is a lot of information about the Institute on our website. Among other things, and I suspect that Kyung Hee does this also, every talk that's given at the Institute, every lecture, the video for those talks is all available online. And it's another wonderful way to introduce people to the work of the Institute. And then we also have a whole series of publications of newsletters and so on that communicate about the seriousness of the work at the Institute to people who are potential donors. So if you look at the newsletters that are done by many American colleges and universities, you'll see that they're full of photographs of parties and events and donors, and that they don't have very much intellectual content. But if you look at the newsletter for the Institute for Advanced Study, you will see that it's almost entirely composed of intellectual content, of very serious articles about mathematics and physics, about issues in historical study and practice, about social issues, and many of them written by our faculty and current members and previous members. And that is another way in which we manage to communicate what it is that's very special and unique about the Institute for Advanced Study.